Hello, it's me, Cheddar Gorgeous, coming to you in these strange circumstances in a virtual form for our lovely conference together. I hope some of you see it, although not too many of you, and if you do listen too closely, the things that I say probably won't make a lot of sense. So try to just enjoy the visual, even though I've been in makeup all day, you know. Don't listen too hard. Don't pay too much attention. I think that's how I've tried to get through in life, ironically. Just to give a bit of context, I talk quite a lot about how great I think drag is. And I do think drag is a really, really wonderful thing. I think it's an amazing form of self-expression, expression and political action. And I'm a big drag fan, as you might know. So keep that in mind when I go into what I'm going to say here, because what I've put together here is a little bit of a counterpoint to a lot of the stuff I say about drag and how wonderful it is for exploring identity. So this following is called The Case Against Drag, or Are Queens Too Loud? The title of today's conference is A Voice for All. Drag has always been a way that I was able to amplify my voice. I always joke that it took me 4 years to do a PhD, yet it took 3 hours of makeup for anybody to listen to anything I had to say. Drag is often lauded for the way it encourages people to explore and express their queerness, be it in an extravagant and over-the-top way. Drag's history with the LGBT community as gender-bending risque entertainment and bold political statement has created a kind of symbolic bond between the art form and the communities from which many drag queens, kings and monsters feel at home. LGBT issues, an expression of our identities and our queerness, kind of go hand in hand with drag a lot of the time, although not at the moment given the current restrictions. Drag certainly has quite the track record of amplifying marginalised voices, and not just our own. We make a literal song and dance of our queerness, but this can be mobilised beyond our own communities to other causes. Panty Bliss in the pro-choice movement in Ireland, the Drag Queens Against Trump march I was involved in 2017, or the recent Extinction Rebellion marches that have seen loads of drag queens participating. I like to think of us as an ultra-visible commando wing of a queer revolutionary army, slowly changing the world, through one dramatic number at a time. What's more, the explosion of drag onto television screens around the world over the last decade through a certain well-known TV show that will remain unnamed, for legal reasons probably, has thrown open certain aspects of our queer world to an ever wider spectatorship. But the popularity of drag also poses a number of risks. To say things even more melodramatically, because I am a drag queen after all, I wish to suggest to you that the power of drag, and through the tenuous connection I just established, all of our queerness is under threat from the success of drag itself. It's a controversial thing to say, I know. Surely not. More queer weirdos on the telly can only be a good thing. But the popularity of drag risks becoming a sort of yardstick by which we can measure the overall acceptance, welfare, security and visibility of a much wider queer community. In this sense, drag becomes the public face of queerness in a disproportionate way, especially given the majority of drag that makes it to the mainstream privileges white men. In this sense, the popularity of drag has the potential to misrepresent the diversity of queer people's experiences and conceal the disparities, inequalities, and even prejudices between the different communities that fall under our big queer umbrella. It's important that I don't fall into the same trap by not being specific here. I am, of course, talking about queer people of colour and trans people. The drag that you see in the mainstream is often limited to theatrical dressing. Theatrical cross-dressing, I should say. It's always theatrical dressing, which tends to cut out a huge amount of the different kinds of drag that are being done by people of different genders and people who don't have a drag for which gender transformation is the centre. The aspects of our culture that are allowed to be celebrated by the mainstream often reinforce mainstream expectations of drag and marvel in the superficiality of a very binary gender transformation. That isn't to say it doesn't have value and it isn't pushing a kind of queer agenda by troubling the distinction between gender. It absolutely is. But sometimes the omissions are just as potent and potentially more powerful in the opposite direction as that which is included. The potential for drag to be taken out of the context of queer struggle here is massive. Our existence and our queerness risks being reduced through drag's popularity to an entertaining performance for a mass audience. Instead of seeing what I do as challenging conformity that adds to a kind of that reveals the absurdity of everyday normative social performances, drag is repackaged as a colourful expression of an inner authentic queerness, or worse, reduces the purpose of my existence to a form of light entertainment. Our queerness, and indeed our struggle, is reduced to an entertaining pastiche, or even worse, an emotive moment on reality television, complete with violins and a semi-structured narrative of redemptive strength. The implications for drag as a form of queer storytelling are immense. As we become more popular and accepted, a distant light of financial security and mass adoration is dangled in front of us. The explosion of drag in the mainstream offers the prospect for drag queens to become genuine famous people with actual money. The problem with this, and I've got no problem with drag queens earning money, I hope to do it myself one day, but the real problem with this is whilst there being a few at the top, the majority of queens and kings are working for small fees, even smaller door splits, or the ever-dwindling prospect of exposure. During the last general election, I was reminded by one Instagram commentator that my job was to entertain people. I've noticed that people are far more interested in me being a sparkly unicorn and reading to kids than me writing "fuck austerity" across my chest or wanting to pour blood over my naked body on a stage. I mean, there are some people who are interested in that too, don't get me wrong, but they don't tend to pay the bills. In our efforts to increase our popularity, to amplify our voices further, to get more adoration that is now a possibility, a dream dangled in front of us, there is a temptation to omit that which offends the sensibilities of the majority. We walk a boundary of the acceptability of everyday appeal and the dangerous allure of going too far. Even when they are interested in my strangeness, it tends to be fixated on my look. People are not as interested in the mundane reality of my life, particularly those bits that don't conform to what people might expect of me, my polyamory or my current position socioeconomically or sexually. And this really risks us reducing the ability that drag has to be a reflection back on society, to make society strange in its own eyes, because we start to get a little bit too cool. But it's not it's not an outrageous idea. It's certainly not something new that's in drag. Queerdo clowns have been playing to the straights for hundreds of years. I mean, Lily Savage was around for a very, very long time and was doing a crazy, very class-based piece of drag. And we've always done that in order to survive. But what might be a little bit different now and in the current sphere is more than ever we're encouraged to compete against each other to improve our positions on an individual basis rather than as a collective of weirdos. There's simply not enough space at the top for all of us and not enough airtime for all our voices, no matter how hard we work. The mainstreamification of drag, I love that word, mainstreamification of drag, has created an entire generation of young people interested in the drag that they have seen on the telly. Some of those artists are doing amazing and interesting work, but most are orientated towards one objective, to one day be famous, just like their idols. This is also not something that is new in drag. If you look at the Vogue scenes of New York in the 90s, they were built around the aspiration to become rich and successful. It's just that now it's much more of a potential reality, or at least it's mythically much more of a potential reality. We're told that it is, although it doesn't practically work out that way for most people. But this entire new generation, their inspirations, experiences and performances all draw upon the same cultural references, often moderated and created for a mainstream audience. Popular drag becomes a monster that feeds itself using the spoon of social media. Far from creating the prosperous egalitarian industry of successful queer artists that are responding to the world around them, What has been created is a mass of readily available talent pool, a reserve army of labour, if you will, to get a little bit Marxist on it. Whilst offering an avenue for the queer world, whilst offering an avenue to queer the mainstream world, the mainstreamification of drag up to this point may also have amplified the undercurrents of unregulated free market economics that use our aspirations to ensure our subjugation to heteronormative ideals. It's going quite deep, I know, but go deep or go home. It's my drag queen phrase. What can I say? Despite being a long-time advocate of the power of drag as a form of self-exploration, expression, political action, I also think we need to be cautious in the ways that we allow the colourful and legible expressions of our queerness, like drag, to become co-opted into the wider structures of power and conformity in mainstream society. And I think this really links into the idea that we all kind of, through our desire to become more visible and to almost create tropes around our visibility, we create these things that are very easily co-opted. Far from a realm of self-discovery and settlement, although self-discovery I would say is definitely from a realm of settlement, drag is a realm that has thrown my identity often into confusion, indeed allowed me to revel in confusion around my identity. This is for me actually what makes drag so great at building confidence, allowing people to embrace the parts of themselves that they effectively feel the most free, that they don't feel the need to conform to anything in particular. I think drag at the moment risks creating a whole set of beauty ideals, behavioural ideals, and models of success that queer people are expected to conform to, and end up defining a wide myriad of queer people's experiences in the eyes of mainstream people who aren't exposed to our lives regularly. It also objectifies us in a peculiar way that makes it harder for other people to embrace their own queerness. We become the queers that you watch on telly, those people who are like the ones on telly. And this isn't just about drag. I think LGBT, we have a tendency to fixate on visually and socially distinct types. We ironically revel in the codification of our identities and the amplification of typing. I wanted to link a little bit, to go a bit off topic, I wanted to link a little bit into Corona and really think about the value of this visibility in light of the current crisis, which has revealed a real weakness in certain kinds of industries for resilience. You know, you have a lot of people, and this is not limited to queer people, but I tell you something, it's certainly affected drag artists and cabaret artists and queer artists, and also, and not just kind of unstable drag queens, also the disproportionate amount of queer people who work in the creative industries and who operate within the gig economy, the big explosive economy over the last 10 years. What it's revealed is that industry in which we thrive and which we have been allowed to thrive and in which we have been able to build the notion of our own security on is actually incredibly insecure and is going to be allowed to continue to be insecure. So whilst support is coming through for traditional wage labour, it is not coming through for the gig economy in which we've been allowed to thrive and been encouraged to place ourselves at risk in. And create our art for people and to put our perspective across. So suddenly our thing that was desirable as a form of entertainment, actually its true value is revealed to the world. To get a little bit dark on the situation, but that's how it is. What is the value of our visibility? Our voice is being heard, a celebration of what makes us fabulous. If the places where we find success and are given space to thrive are not preserved during times of crisis. Yes, maybe this is not a national priority, nor is it an issue that it singles out queer people alone, but it should at least be given as much credence as other forms of labour that are not as, yeah, you get my point. Finish. Yeah, so I suppose really I wanted to, because the Corona stuff's thrown me off a little bit, I suppose I wanted to pose the question, like I said to you earlier, I really feel there is a need to balance I think we need to ask the question of what kind of drag we want to support and what kind of drag do we want moving forward. And I need to be clear that I'm not all doom and gloom with this. I actually think that these things always operate with an attention. We operate between attention and between it, and the gay rights movement always has operated between attention for a need to strategically invite people into our worlds and find ways that they can engage with it, whilst also challenging the oppressive worlds that we feel we're living in. I think we need to ask ourselves how much of a nexus of transmission of homonormativity and unregulated free market capitalism are we willing to be, or how much do we wish to be the thin end of a queer wedge that changes the world's attitudes towards gender, sexuality and freedom. And it's of course likely to be both of those things simultaneously, sometimes in conflict and sometimes working together. This tension always exists and always will, but I wish to suggest to you that a focus on our desire to be seen, and indeed the volume at which art forms like drag are able to amplify certain queer voices over others, must be measured with a strategic awareness of its effects on our wider queer collective and the wider community of artists that do drag. And I think I've waffled on for long enough. I've gone majorly over time. And I'd love to hear your questions and engagement and all of that malarkey. Let's trouble it back. You know, come at me. Talk to you later.